This is the Counselling Insights Podcast, a podcast to help you develop your own insights and practices as you listen to Vicki Ann's connect with counselors and helping professionals about their work, their passions, and their strategies.
Welcome to another episode of the Counselling Insights Podcast. My name is Vicki and I am your host. And joining me again today is Joddie Walker. She has come back to explore a topic together that we've chosen just to be curious about together and invite you as listeners to think and muse along with us. So welcome back, Joddie. Really glad to do this again.
Thank you, Vicki. I love spending time with you.
So our topic that we chose today is the idea of wounded healer.
Yes. So a topic I love to talk about, and a topic, well, how do you feel about talking about this podcast today?
So we were chatting about this before we started, and I will confess, I will put out there and own that I actually suggested this topic. And however, as I started to try to prepare a little bit, I realized, I don't want to talk about this at all. So I'm going to roll with it. But yeah, I'm very aware. I'm not as excited about this topic. I have some feelings. I'm sure we'll get into it.
Yeah, we're going to get into it.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing.
Well, should we start with just trying to define it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think of when you think wounded healer?
So it's an archetype, right?
That's one way it's often described.
Okay.
Yeah, it's often attributed to Carl Jung in terms of just that wording. I mean, that's one place. I don't think he's the only guy that ever thought about this.
So the wounded healer, the reference can be either positive or negative, and this is what we're going to start to explore a little bit today too, right? So that positive inference is that the lived experience that we've had as helpers, and we bring that to the therapeutic relationship, and how that can be helpful to not only the helper but your client.
Right.
The negative, that wounded helper, is that inference around, you haven't kind of figured your stuff out yet, and because of that, you can do further harm to your clients. Yeah. So we've got lots to unpack, and so that's why I'm excited about this topic.
That's why I'm dreading it. No, but so part of if I back up and think about, okay, why did I want to talk about this idea? Because it's not a new idea. I think to most of our listeners, like it's not a new concept certainly, and they might be really familiar with it in a way. How it struck me when I think I came across an article or a blog or something, and I read it kind of as an old term, like wounded healer, like that feels, well, and I mean, it was a long time ago that Carl Jung introduced that term. However, this, whatever it was I was reading, was kind of revisiting the term and acknowledging, like what you just referenced, is that there is often, I think, kind of a negative association or caution attached to this idea in our field. And they were kind of suggesting, like reminding or reclaiming in a way that I think the original intent, at least for Carl Jung, and again, I think for other folks too, is to recognize that there's a positivity to this. Like, so you used the word archetype. And so, the notion that if we recognize that this can be a central part of who we are as humans.
Right.
And that, I mean, what I wrote down kind of from Jung's way of describing it, the belief that adverse experiences actually afford healers greater empathy and transformative power that they can then bring into their healing work. And so I just thought that was interesting to kind of revisit what felt like a bit of an old and dusty term to me.
Yeah.
And to consider and I think that's the question I'm trying to come into this conversation with, is there something useful about this, or is there something for myself personally that I may be avoiding or not embracing that it might be useful to look at just from another angle. So yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot of curiosity in the field around vicarious trauma, around effective use of self in the therapy room.
Right.
So we're going to connect some of those dots in this topic today. That's what excites me, because I know lots of people, whether you are a seasoned therapist
Right.
or brand new, are always open to kind of understanding how do my own wounds of life influence who I am as a therapist and how I show up for clients. So that excites me, right? Because people want to bring their best selves to the therapy room. So
Oh, okay. So I'm wanting to understand why this excites you. So
I love your tone. Oh, okay.
no, so say some more about that. Like, there's something about, like, for you, it sounds like you right away think about this as it's a pathway in for people to connect with something that contributes to how we develop as counselors and therapists. Am I saying that right? Or
yeah.
what would you say?
I think, you know what has shaped me as being a therapist. So before I became a psychotherapist, which I've been having this title for about 12 years now. So prior to that, in about good 20 years, I was in different roles. Yeah. So I came into the role as psychotherapist, and we all have mentors or clinical supervisors, right? That influence who we are, who we want to be, and who we don't want to be. And some of that messaging around kind of be your best self, kind of hide those parts of yourself that are wounded, to use the language we're talking about today, hide those wounded parts of yourself, make sure they don't show up in the therapeutic setting, don't share anything private, confidential, and then flash forward, here I sit 12 years later, and I feel very differently about those messages. Some are still true, I still hold the truths around how I effectively use my self-disclosure of my own wounds. It has to be for therapeutic gain, but I no longer feel shameful. I no longer feel like an imposter, right? That imposter syndrome. So that's why this topic excites me, because it's okay to be human in this role as therapist or helper.
Yeah. And I do really resonate with that, what you're saying. And I really agree with you. And I think in my reflection about this, like, in terms of just initial, more maybe cognitive or kind of an intellectual consideration of the topic, I think that's where I have gotten to as well. Because as I maybe mentioned already, like, I think when I first think about the topic, just at more of a cognitive level, I recognize that as a student or in my early days, I think it was kind of introduced to me as with all that risk attached to it, and the same messages you've just referenced, and usually, you know, kind of the worry about inappropriate use of self-disclosure, as well as how, just it might make us more at risk of burning out, and being less effective, right? So I think there was introduced to me with kind of that negative thing. But absolutely, I agree with you. I don't agree with that direct association. I mean, those risks maybe are true, but I think there's a lot more to it. But I think what I realized is, as I just started to drop down from my head even a tiny bit, right, and just connect with this topic, I think the reason why it's uncomfortable is because it's like, oh, there's vulnerable stuff there, right? And we're talking about our own wounds and soft spots and tender spots that that are just there, but also maybe get stirred up in the work, and it's hard to feel those things. And I think that's my pushback a little bit.
Because when reflecting on this topic, it's slightly different than just talking about vicarious trauma. Right? So when we're talking about vicarious trauma, that's that impact of hearing our clients' stories and how they can impact us through our empathy with those stories. This goes a little deeper, right? In that awareness that, why does that story impact you? Why do you have empathy in the first place? Right? That empathy, that ability to put yourself in their shoes momentarily comes from a deeper place, oftentimes a place of being wounded yourself in the same way. Not exactly the same story, but the same feelings of fear, loneliness, abandonment, whatever it may be, right? So here we are, Vicki, today we are talking about that deeper level underneath vicarious trauma of the stories from the clients, to talk about kind of the impact and influence of our own wounds. and how we be okay with the fact that they will be touched and triggered and affected in the therapeutic room, and how do we manage that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do think, as you talked about that, it gets me thinking about, like, I think where I've started to find this really helpful is to really be able to shift it from just an individual focus of just like my own experiences and how does it relate to you, the client, or the other person, right? Kind of that separation, but more recognizing that connected, just human place. And so as you were saying, maybe we have similar experiences. Maybe it's not the same story. And that kind of links into the question of, I think sometimes people come at this too of, are we a better helper or counselor for someone if we have shared the same life experience? And I think sometimes yes, right? And maybe sometimes that's not as important. People will have very different opinions on that specifically. But regardless of whether our experiences are exactly the same or how much commonality there is, or even if our stories are vastly different, we all come back. There's a shared humanity. There's a place of commonality that we can all tap into around just vulnerability, around losses, around fear, around joy, around those are the places that where we can really find connection.
Yeah. Just listening to you brings me back to my time when I was doing response during 9/11. Like, talk about imposter syndrome, right?
Okay.
Being called upon to respond to civilians who were in the South Tower and had gotten out. So 4 days after the attack, I was down there and sent down there to provide crisis intervention to those people. And essentially, for 12-hour drive from Ontario down to New York City was all about, who the heck do I think I am that I can offer these people any form of support and intervention? And that awareness unfolded in that week, months, even years later, right? That awareness of, we collectively shared in that room together, not the skills and tools. That's probably wasn't their takeaway. Like, what did Joddie say to me in those hours that made everything better? It was more about that shared humanity of fear, right? Of survival. That's the important piece.
Right.
So that learning from that journey carried me through to my victim witness days, right? When I was providing support to very vulnerable crime victims going through the justice system, and, a parent who's lost a child to homicide. Again, that imposter syndrome quickly pops up again. Who are you to think that you can provide any kind of support and help for this person? To only learn that just being present with someone who, feels so alone in their pain and grief, and to simply hold their hand can be enough.
Right.
Can be enough.
Well, and that makes me think about, like, before you were highlighting maybe a little bit of a distinction between this topic of wounded helper, wounded healer, and vicarious trauma, how we often think about that. As you talk about your experiences going to support folks after 9/11, it feels, I'm wondering about, there's a link there maybe, because I'm sure you were very vicariously impacted by these, the literal and just immense wounds that were so raw and so real around you. And so how do you, like, somehow then that became part of your own story, part of your own woundedness? I don't know if that's overstating it, but what would you say?
For sure. I mean, again, I didn't know at the time. I didn't have this self-awareness. And that's why I get excited talking about this topic, because we have the potential to educate people so they can increase their awareness when it does show up in their life.
Right.
So for me, the vicarious impact of that work was around the fear and terror that impacted my nervous system, and where it shows up and becomes triggered. Like, to this day, if I'm in my kitchen and there's a plane that is a little too loud, I turn my head. Right? So there's different ways that experience shows up, but we can't talk about trauma or vicarious trauma without talking about growth and resilience, right? So I've learned a lot about myself in terms of what I can do and what is enough. I don't have to be the ultimate healer, right? I can show up as a wounded healer and be enough for someone.
Right. Yeah. And I think that is one of the real powerful shifts in my own thinking about this too, or the things I really appreciate about, again, kind of reading a few and thinking about a few different ways that people maybe come at this topic, maybe not always using the wounded healer language, but, there's a lot of Indigenous authors, for example, that relate to this topic and really link to the notion of if, what I've been taught or what I understand is thinking about healing as a more reciprocal and very much a relationship,
Right.
versus, kind of therapist up here and client down here or something that is a clunky way to contrast it. But I think that notion of we're interconnected and we're all humans together, and just that collective, that more of a collective experience and that there's such healing and transformative power in entering into that collective experience with people. Hearing that in your story about that. Yeah.
And that's my new area of growth, leaning into Indigenous ways of healing, right?
Yeah.
So as I'm learning from my colleagues and trying to shed some of that Western view, it's hard, right?
Yeah.
But I'm leaning into that.
So I'm noticing how I'm very deftly avoiding talking about my own. So maybe I'll just go there a little bit. I know that part of my feelings around this, I'm kind of, there is some avoidance, but it's not it's more, it's a little bit of self-protection. Because I notice that where my mind goes is also thinking about where are we at, and this is an ever-moving thing, but where are we at in our healing to whatever wound it is we're thinking about, right? And I guess that's just one way to think about it. Like for some folks, as they listen to this and connect to their own story, there might be very particular wounds, like the day of 9/11, right? Like something really specific, or a specific day in their own life, or a period of time in their family life, or an experience, So there might be very specific happenings. And then for others, it might be more of just like something that is diffuse across time. And so when I think about for myself, how I relate to this, I realize that part of my struggle is if I tap into how am I feeling wounded right now? Like it's still, it's a bit of I don't want to get too graphic in the analogy of the wound, but it feels a bit open, right? Versus if I think about, like one way I can relate to this is if I think about something that's more in the past that does feel like it's something it's something that happened.
Yeah.
And yes, I still carry impact, but now I can relate to it. So for example, the loss of my mom. My mom died about a year ago. And that, of course, it wasn't a traumatic event, but it was incredibly difficult and very impactful. And now I'm about a year on. And so just as like I know at the time, I was much more like around a year ago when this was just happening and she was not well and then she died. And so in the time before and just shortly after, I think I felt this same feeling of a little more protective. And I wasn't necessarily talking about it with my clients as openly. I was sharing with my friends, but I was kind of careful to keep that a little bit tucked away for various reasons. But now a year on, there's been moments where I can refer to it and it feels different. I feel in a different spot to relate to it.
Yeah.
I think there's other things in my life, and I can name it. I think I have an ongoing stressor. I have a partner with chronic ongoing health concerns and challenges, and sometimes we enter into crisis with that, and then we exit out of crisis with that. And this has been an ongoing thing for decades, and it's current and it's ongoing. And so, and I've been thinking a lot lately about how that's shaping me and us in our life, and that feels very personal.
Right.
And I'm okay to talk about it, but I realized when I thought about that in relation to me as a counselor, and that's where it starts to get a little blurry, and because it's something that it's current.
It's current, yeah.
It's not over, right? And
Yeah.
so that's been interesting to me to tap into. So that feels a different kind of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
what I'm struck with is your awareness of those two wounds and their stage of healing, and where you still need to be protective of a wound that still feels kind of open, right? Because as humans, that's what we do, right? We guard against pain.
Yeah.
And it's okay, right?
Yeah.
It's totally okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we've been talking about our own, how we personally relate to this topic a little bit. So what if we step back just a bit and also think about just other ways that folks may connect to this notion of wounded healer, or how this may show up in their development as a counselor? Yeah. What do you think?
For me, what comes to mind is that awareness around our own adverse childhood events, right? So helpers that have experienced physical abuse in their childhoods, sexual abuse in their childhood, neglect, violence in their community, bullying, all the different ways that we can be wounded through our life experiences, and feeling like, okay, I know this happened, but I'm in a good place and I'm moving forward.
Yeah.
Going through school, now I'm going to be a helper because I want to make this world a better place than what I experienced as a child, which is amazing, right? That's amazing that we have those people in the world. My message is just around that. Please be aware that this is a wound, right? And to have that awareness of, is this a wound that is healed over? Because you've done some work around it. You're aware of when it can get triggered or activated in the therapeutic room. Because without that awareness is a vulnerability that you hold. Right. That your client's story could be impacting and touching upon you as you become highly empathetic to the emotions that they're experiencing, and reopens that wound even slightly.
Right.
So, and that lets in that vicarious trauma that feeds that original wound and becomes kind of raw again. Right.
Yeah. So it's a real vulnerability. It sounds like you're thinking particularly for the helper or counselor themselves, and also to the work with the client, right? It just makes it all feel maybe a little more open and a little bit less clear. Yeah. But I appreciate that. How it can just poke at or kind of open up our own wounds again. We might feel some of that impact in a different way or a new way. Yeah.
And it might be even subtle. Like if we haven't, say we grew up in domestic violence, so we have this heightened awareness for mood, right? And we can read that in tone, in all those subtleties in an instant. And our childhood instinct was to make the room okay, right? I make mom, dad, or caregiver feel better about who they are and how they're showing up, so that the temperature comes down a little bit and that no one gets hurt. Well, now I have through time become and learned, it's a learned response around being a people pleaser. So now here I am in the therapeutic room, and I want to have a difficult conversation with my client around pointing out a behavior that they're doing that might be a risk to them. But knowing that if I venture down into that conversation, they're going to be upset.
Yeah.
Right? So is my instinct to not go there and not point out the client's behavior because it feels safer just to keep things kind of status quo in the real therapeutic relationship. So it's just noticing when those things, are influenced by our wounds.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because as you described that, I was thinking it's a good example or illustration of, I think, of how maybe these wounds, these experiences can also contribute to a real positive or almost like a strength for a counselor. Like when you said, like a person who, and I can relate to that a little bit even in my own story, like kind of, learning to read the room, right? And so like you described, like someone who maybe grew up in settings where for survival reasons they were always scanning and maybe just really aware. And then like you just outlined, it might lead to them instinctively learning to then take care of things to try to make everybody feel safer.
Yeah.
But there's also almost a superpower in that, right? Like just that intuitive, like just such a keen, acute sensing and reading. And I think that's one of the ways, I think going back to how we started talking about this, Carl Jung's notion of this as a potentially transformative power and deeper empathy, right? And so that's where it's like there's those two sides. Like on one hand, I think when we really lean into what our life experiences have been, whatever they are, right? And if we can use all that as part of how we read the world and move through the world, it can add to our toolbox, to put it that way. However, it can also be a bit of a blind spot.
Yeah.
It can be both at the same time. Yeah.
I love that word that you use, superpower, right?
Yeah.
It can become our superpower.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of what makes you feel kind of alive in the therapeutic room,
Yeah.
where you lean into a client's story, like literally with your body language as well as with your words, and where a client feels genuinely heard and seen, right? So, earlier you mentioned how some helpers go into certain work based on their experiences. Like, for example, someone who's had an eating disorder and now has healed and gone into the work to treat others who are experiencing disordered eating, right? So that's a very good example of how I'm bringing my story into that helping role.
Right.
It just comes back to that awareness for ourselves. But can you imagine someone who's lived that experience to be able to say words that someone who has not lived that can't read or learn out of a book, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You saying that reminds me of something else, again, and just kind of reading different people's thoughts on this and just to help me reflect on different perspectives. Someone was talking about, within this topic, the myth of the fully healed healer, right? And so just to throw that in there, right? Because I think right now we've been talking about, the importance of maybe thinking about where you're at in your own healing in relation to whatever you think of as one's own woundedness. However, maybe another question then is like, is it even possible to become fully healed? Is that a truth? Or is that even desirable? Is that even the way we want to think about it? It's interesting.
Yeah, that's a
Right.
big question. Because I'm thinking of it from the perspective of a client asking this: how do I know when I'm fully healed?
Right, yeah.
Right. But also, you're posing it today for us as helpers.
Yeah.
You referenced how a year ago you lost your mom.
Yeah.
Right. So life will continue to unfold for us as helpers.
Right.
More wounds will happen. And those wounds that we experience now can touch on previous wounds of loss.
Yeah.
Right? So do I think that we're ever fully healed? No.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that makes me think of going back to how earlier we talked about that place of shared humanity, or, I think one of the truths in reflecting on this and just life is teaching me, whether I want it to or not, and I don't have any control over that, is that this notion of wounding or suffering or, whatever verb we want to use, it's an ongoing, just a reality of life, right? And there's so many moving parts. So talking about my mom dying, there's still days, as I'm sure this is true for everybody, with whatever their own experiences have been, but she'll pop in my head almost every day. And there's some days where I feel really like kind of my breath catches and it just hits me. And other days I don't feel any sense of, not such sharp vulnerability. However, having gone through that, it gives me a different lens on other things that happen. So I actually just learned this morning in an email that one of my uncles passed away, my dad's brother. And this is not someone I've been really close with for a long time, or I haven't seen him since I was a kid necessarily, didn't have as much of a personal relationship. But I think I feel something different because of what I've more recently, of grieving my mom over this last year. So I'm thinking about my cousins, and I'm thinking about, it's just giving me a different perspective on then the next thing that happens in life, right? And maybe that's a way that our story, it's an ongoing unfolding, this notion of healing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to call that wisdom. Right? So we felt something, we understand it better, and we can bring that wisdom forward to our clients that as we're sharing what grief can feel like.
Right.
You know, how some days it's heavier than others.
Yeah.
How a new loss can trigger an old loss. Like,
Yeah.
it's wisdom.
Yeah. So that makes me think of what if we talk a little bit more about how have you experienced this? Have we each experienced this at all in connection with clients? So for you, Joddie, like, can you recall a time in your own work life where your own life experiences have helped you feel more deeply connected with a client, or where that's maybe more specifically come up in your role with someone?
Yeah, this is where I align with you and like, I don't want to talk about myself.
Yeah.
But being a single parent, right? So when I have a client, male or female, it's not about the role of mom. It's a single parent who is struggling with all the things, from trying to work to the worries, particularly raising kids or children who are experiencing mental health challenges, right? So that is a real strong area of empathy that I can identify with. Yeah. So I understand, though, that's also a wound for me, right? So my daughter is now 20, doing well, but in her earlier years, in those middle school years were really a challenge.
Yeah.
So when I hear that in the room, my ability to draw on some of that wisdom can be so helpful for the client. But I know that I need to go away after that session and really kind of take good care of myself and ask myself some reflective questions in order to kind of show up the next day.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
How about you?
Well, I think certainly, just because I've been talking about my mom, I think that example is top of mind. And as I mentioned already, like just noticing maybe even over this last year, how that's felt differently. So on one hand, I'm sure many people have this experience. Like if you go through something, maybe even if it's something further in your past or more present, it can sometimes feel like it's showing up all the time in your clients' stories. And so it's probably always there, right? And people, because again, there's that shared humanity, but we're maybe highly attuned to the things from which we feel some wounding, right? Yeah. So we're going to notice that more, resonate more strongly. And so certainly, again, a year ago or closer to the time of my mom's death, I think I often would notice I was just way more impacted or feeling if my clients were talking about loss or fearing, the loss of a loved one or, those kinds of stories. But it was interesting because more recently, just in the last couple of weeks, actually, it was a different kind of experience and where I had a client who was, somehow this came up where they were talking about just their own age and stage, I think, and talking about, thinking about loss of family members. And my mom popped in my head and I did choose to share something. Which I think was probably the first time I've done that. So that was interesting. That's why it stands out for me. Like I did that I paused and I thought about it in my own head first. And I made a very intentional choice to just share a little bit of something related to what my client was saying. And what stood out for me was both how that felt, that felt good for me and it felt appropriate. But then what happened next was really informative and it turned out good. But my client, tears sprang to her eyes. And I think we both really resonated together. But what it also reminded me and taught me, and it ended up being a good thing, but when we share something really personal, I think there's real power in that, like power in a positive way. Like there's a deep resonating that can happen, that shared humanity. Yeah. But we don't know what it's all going to spark in the other person.
Right.
And so I wasn't surprised because she was kind of referencing her own family. And so at first, it just made sense to me that she was resonating. But then as she talked a little more about what that stirred up, it really opened up in her some grief and some real longing of what wasn't there in her relationship with her own mother. And that was a very fruitful thing to explore. But it wasn't necessarily, I couldn't have been anticipated that my sharing of that was going to open that up for her. And it was just that teaching of this when we share of ourselves, it's powerful to us, but there's a potency, I think, when we share those real authentic experiences. And that's just something to be aware of, just to know that can happen. And we never know for sure what kind of impact it'll have on our clients. Yeah. It's a good teaching.
It's connecting with me around earlier when we were talking about Indigenous ways of sharing and helping. And there's no power dynamic in that sharing of story, right? And in that moment, right, you really discarded that power imbalance between helper and client and said, hey, not in these words, but, you know, I understand and I've had a similar experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And needing to let go of maybe that more Western notion of, I have a thought, I have an intervention, here's what how I'm going to apply it, this is going to be the outcome, we're going to measure it, right? Letting that go. Right? And it's just like, let's just be two humans, and here's what that sparked in me. And now this is what sparked in you, right?
Yeah.
It was a very different kind of, not a straight line kind of thing. It's a different kind of experience.
Well, I think that's what I've learned in my 12 years as a therapist in particular is I now am at a place where relationship is the foundation of doing trauma work.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm not saying like, oh, let's have a relationship where I tell you all things about me as a therapist. It's not about that, but it's about showing up authentically.
Right. Yeah.
And to do so, it means you're guided in the self-awareness of being able to have control over your story and your wounds so that you can intentionally decide, is me sharing a piece of me important to your wellness and understanding what you're going through? Versus there would have been a time that wouldn't even been a thought, right? Like it's an absolute no.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
I would have been that therapist you just referenced. Like, right, okay, what's the therapeutic tool we pull out now? That it's about our humanity. We have to honor that. We can't leave that at the door.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have that's a lovely segue, I think, bringing us back around to what if we talk a little more about, just dig into a little more, like, okay, so if we're embracing, sounds like we both are, I've come around, we're embracing this idea as something we can see as a strength, perhaps is one way to put it. Or one quote I read was, the wound is not a flaw, but it's a source of insight and transformation. That we can look at this through a strength-based lens and even encourage all of us as helpers or counselors to relate to our own woundedness, or however we think of ourselves as wounded healer, how we connect, and how we might think about intentionally bringing that into our counseling work.
Yes.
And so part of that you were just naming, I think, is, I mean, it's not here are the 3 steps of how you do that, right? But it's that reflection of what you're just naming, of how do we embody that and bring that with us into a conversation or a room, and maybe sometimes it's something we speak out loud, maybe sometimes it's more just influences how we're listening, how we're feeling, but it's that developing that self-awareness so we can make those choices in any given moment.
Because I think for what you're saying, and able to do that, we have to let go of our own shame. Right?
Yeah.
I think even though we have this maybe cognitive awareness that I shouldn't feel shame because I grew up in domestic violence. I shouldn't feel shame because X, Y, and Z happened to me. But the big but, we are human. As helpers, we are human. And that element of shame can still be so present. Right? So coming back to like, am I intentionally aware? If I'm not, what's influencing that? Am I silencing myself? Am I silencing my historical wounds because I have shame? Versus am I silencing them because they're healed and they're not therapeutically relevant in this session? Those are 2 different awareness, right?
And whether, and just to say out loud, like, do I feel shame just because that's maybe woven into part of the original experience for me? Or also this notion, like we've started out with, that my community of my field, it might be seen as a weakness if I have some
Right.
vulnerability, right? If I'm crying along with my client, or if I'm having some feelings at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, for many of us, there's often that was part of our training. Yeah.
And
it's hard
happens,
to let go of.
It becomes part of who we think we are and how we have to show up.
Right.
Which we don't. We can shed that. But also, unfortunately, there's a lot of workspaces that still give those overt messages around, maybe you're not kind of cut out for this population.
Right, right.
Only because after the client's left, you're having a moment
Right.
of being human and feeling for them. Like,
Yeah.
that's why these topics and these podcasts are so important, to help people understand that you are human first.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's try to do the thing where we where we try to come up with some tangible. So, what are we thinking for ourselves? How might our listeners? What are some action? Now my Western brain is kicking in. What are some strategies? You know, what are some things we can? We might intentionally think about or work on around this to strengthen our own connection with this transformative power that we all have as human beings.
Many things come to mind.
Okay.
So I think about our own self-awareness of kind of naming what events have have happened and we've lived through. We don't even have to label them traumatic, but just kind of what events.
Yeah.
And in that, also this awareness of what stories have led to vicarious trauma impact.
Yeah.
Do those stories connect back to an event that I've lived through? Or are they independent? Because I want people to increase their awareness between what stories have vicarious impact versus which stories touch our wounds. Right?
Right. Yeah. So kind of teasing apart what's mine and what's someone else's.
Yeah.
Where does that person end and where do I begin? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's so important, I think, just in general, just for our own healing, first and foremost. But then if we bring it into like counselors in the counseling room, it links to what we were already talking about before, I think, helping us make those decisions of when do we use maybe thoughtful self-disclosure? When might we share some of that? Or when do we recognize, this is stirring up stuff and I tuck it away and create time for myself later, kind of thing, that sort of thing. Okay, so in some ways what we're talking about right now, if we can categorize these maybe a little bit. And so as we named earlier, one of the risks or things to maybe that's helpful to be aware of with this topic is the very real possibility of how this can also maybe add to our vulnerability around vicarious trauma or our own woundedness. And so being able to use that appropriately and take care of ourselves. A linked area that we can maybe think about paying attention to is just how this might, what can we do to help ourselves not have this contribute to potentially burnout or greater compassion fatigue or anything like that. Some strategies that link in for that.
Comes back to self-awareness, right? So it can happen even kind of before the therapy session, during the therapy session, after the therapy session. So we can go into our next client hour with body scans, right? Where is tension showing up? Where do I feel sensations? What are those sensations? Where are they linked to? What is pulling my attention away?
Right.
So just increasing my self-awareness in both body and mind, even during the session, right? If we notice that something about the client's story is starting to unsettle me, can I wiggle my toes in my shoes, right? Can I have a cold glass of water beside me, right? So do I have a few just easy sensory strategies to keep me grounded and present in the therapy room? And then afterwards, not only doing the grounding of, again, self-reflection of where do I feel it in my body, but also asking myself, where is this linking to?
Right.
Containing that for your own future clinical supervision or your own future therapeutic session to explore that a little more because your body's remembering a story. Right?
Yeah. As you're saying that, Joddie, what comes to mind for me is an important spice to sprinkle in there while doing all that is self-compassion, is how I put it. Like,
I know.
I think that's something I've really learned to try to work with this stuff. Because let me say this. Like, I know that 20 years ago, I've been doing this a while, 15 years ago, I used to be very much more compartmentalized in my brain about these things. And it served me. So to say that another way, like, I think whatever my woundedness was, I worked for all the reasons we've already unpacked in this podcast. I tried to kind of park it at the door and keep it quite separate. And I think there was ways that served me and worked well. It was self-protective. I don't think it was always, it also cost me a little bit. Now at this stage in my life, part of it's age, part of it's all that wisdom that we've talked about. I can't do that anymore. And I'm both grateful for that and a little bit horrified. Horrified is a strong word. I think it's like how I started this podcast. It's like, have feelings and I'm not able to just lock it away anymore. And there's a part of me that misses that a little bit.
Right.
However, really I'm grateful that I'm more of a whole 3-dimensional human being wherever I go, right? And so to come back to self-compassion. So I've learned, I think, when I'm in, as you were just saying, if I'm in a session, something a client's talking about, it's making me feel some of my own stuff, that I kind of have my own way of, I sometimes will quite literally, I just put my hand on my heart, right? And it's just a physical gesture, but inside it's like, I'm ignoring. It's like, oh, there you are. Yeah. And that's okay. And then I do the thing, like I wiggle my toes, I sticky note that,
Yeah.
But that moment of self-compassion has become very intentional for me, and it's a kind of new within the last 5 years, but it's that's an important step in there for me anyway.
This is why I like hanging out with you, because you are wiser than me. Reading the writings through blogs and your book, self-compassion for me is still a work in progress. Even like recently I noticed a trainer that we're bringing on for CTRI in their kind of initial interview did an exercise. And essentially the exercise she asked us to do was think of a client who was in crisis, kind of how did you respond to them? What were your internal thoughts about this client in crisis and how they present? I said all these lovely things, right? Like I was compassionate for them. I was patient. I helped them reframe, recognize their strengths. Then she asked, okay, think about the last time you were in a crisis. Did you do those exact same things? And I didn't, right? Like that judgmental, that keep going, that self-compassion kind of would be last on the list for myself. So, or compassion being last on the list. So I love that you have talked about that. Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the things that really connects in with, which is maybe one other area I really want to highlight that I've learned, I think, through reflecting on this is that connection is to expand. When I think about this notion of myself as a wounded healer, that's not such an individual, it's just me alone in my pain and distress and something, woe is me, right? That it's that there's a connection that allows me, I do have my own individual experience, but that also is a connecting point to the collective, like to it, that shared humanity again, like that. I think that is the really important way for me to plug this concept into something that helps me feel, I get how this is a strength, right? And something that we want to pay attention to and allow ourselves to open up to. And so that notion of approaching this as more of a collective, a way that we connect to something bigger than just our own experience. And it's a connecting point between whoever it is you're talking about, even if you're from entirely different places on this planet, or even if you live down the street, but you've had entirely different worlds growing up. So we can honor our individual experiences and at the same time recognize we have connection with absolutely anybody in this world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's making me think of when I worked with crime victims in particular, and language is so powerful, right? So
Yeah.
the justice system gives one the title of victim if you've been a victim of a crime.
Right.
So, helping individuals move from that and shed that label of victim to survivor, right? So when we become a survivor, it's
Yeah.
when part of that healing is that identification of, I, like so many, have survived X, Y, and Z, right? So that's what is landing for me as I hear you share about how, as helpers, we are part of something bigger than just ourselves, that we are part of humanity who have experienced sometimes terrible things, sad things. And what have we learned about ourselves through that? And how can we bring that learning to others? Yeah.
Well, I think we're at that place where we try to identify what's your kind of main takeaway from today, or just to highlight something that stood out for you. And I think for me, it is this last piece we've touched on, is kind of that connection to more of a collective. And in my mind, that I think that allows me to reframe the term of, like, I don't think I'm ever gonna like wear a badge that says, "Hi, I'm a wounded healer." However, I can relate, I can embrace it. But I think for me, what it's coming to is, I'm a human being. Like, that's really what it's meaning to me as a takeaway from this conversation. How about you?
My takeaway is, when we can embrace self-compassion and understand, yes, that we are in the business of helping humans and we show up as humans, that's okay. And in doing so, kind of, I think for me, heals some of that shame that got created way back in childhood and created the wound in the first place, right? So it's that awareness that when we show up, we're not only hopefully helping others, but also hopefully healing a part of ourselves.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you, Joddie. This ended up actually being quite a pleasant conversation.
I'm so glad, Vicki.
Thank you so much for doing this again with me. Look forward to our next one.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And to you, our listeners, thank you for once again joining us and listening in on our conversation. Come on back next month for the next podcast. And so until then, be well and stay curious.
Looking for free resources and training in the areas of trauma, counseling, and mental health? Be sure to check out our website at www.ctrinstitute.com.